Jason Lange is a relationship and masculinity coach, founder of Evolutionary Men, and an advocate for personal growth through deep, meaningful relationships. Drawing from evolutionary psychology, Jason helps men uncover their true potential, enhancing their emotional, psychological, and relational well being. His work focuses on helping men navigate intimacy, vulnerability, and healthy expression of masculinity. His approach emphasizes a holistic approach to understanding human behavior, with a particular focus on emotional intelligence, sexual connection, and how men can cultivate deeper, more satisfying relationships with their partners. So, a hell of a lot, really. Everything there is to do. He believes that by tapping into the evolutionary nature of men, we can not only improve our romantic lives, but also enhance our overall quality of life with greater satisfaction and emotional fulfillment. And who wouldn't want that? I certainly would be giving up for that one. So thank you for joining us today from Colorado. It's very kind of you. I just wonder if you'd be okay taking a quick step back to understand what your formative years were like, and if you can connect the person you were then to the person you are now.
Yeah, absolutely. Unsurprisingly, my journey to becoming a men's work facilitator started with my own personal journey of, what I needed. And in a lot of ways, it began pretty young for
Mm-hmm.
me. I'm a white guy raised in the Midwest of the United States, kind of lower middle class, and had pretty much all my basic security needs provided for me, right? In a lot of ways, a lot of privilege. But as I grew older, and particularly as I became an adolescent and hit puberty, and in my case, I'm heterosexual, got interested in girls, I started to be confronted with what wasn't easy for me, let's just say. And I had a lot of pain around connecting to women. I would get really anxious and uncomfortable in my body and kind of tight and didn't know how to talk. And this perpetuated for many years into my 20s and was a source of great pain as I saw my friends getting into relationships, having experiences, and I couldn't quite figure it out. And more, depression and kind of mental stress just took me over. And long and short of it, it got me on a path of realizing, oh, well, while I had a lot of things provided for me literally as an infant up to a young man, the one thing my family did not know how to do was emotional connection and, frankly, physical connection. There
Mm-hmm.
wasn't much touch and there was not much intimacy in terms of just talking about what's real, what we're experiencing in our bodies, what I'm feeling. And in particular, I didn't have a very strong connection with my mother in my case. And I tell this story about when I was, I think, when I was about maybe 15. I did this summer program for like an environmental camp where a friend's father was going to drive a bunch of us out, and it's cool learning thing. And we were carpooling, so he was driving us in a minivan. He kind of went around, got all the kids, got to my house, and I viscerally had this memory of my mom walking me out, and it was kind of the first time I went away on my own, I guess you could say. And because, I don't know, media, culture, whatever, like we hugged goodbye. And I remember it feeling really weird. Just like, this
Yeah.
feels really weird. And I didn't really understand it. And I kind of just went on. Years later, when I was doing, finally kind of on the inner path and doing some deep work with a somatic therapist, I realized, oh, that felt weird. Because before that moment, I could not tell you the last time I physically touched or was touched by my mother. Like as far back as my memory went, it just was not there. And so, long and short, this inner pain I was carrying caused me to go out and try to find, like, okay, there's got to be a better way. Like, I'm just not feeling good in my body, in my day to day as a young man. And it really led me to two things which transformed my life after, a lot of meandering, but somatic therapy, which was helping me get in touch with my body and know what I was feeling inside, and then men's groups and men's work, where I learned to kind of go deeper inside myself. And by working those things, lo and behold, all my relationships started to change. And it's been a long journey, but I'm now at a place where I'm much more comfortable in my skin, have an amazing wife, kids, beautiful friendships and relationships, and a lot of that inner turmoil is gone. And that now, I'm particularly passionate about specifically helping men around, which is moving from disconnection to connection, which in a lot of ways I think is kind of one of the miracle medicines of our time that a lot of people, and men in particular, are very malnourished on. Just the feeling of being present and emotionally connected and seen by someone. And there's lots of reasons for that, that what us men are taught and the way society has played out. But I've just continued on that path, and it just keeps revealing more and more gifts and layers of the onion to how I can become a more whole person. And frankly, I just started talking about it so much in my own journey. Eventually, people started asking me, like, "Hey, can you help me?" And that kind of was the big pivot of my life.
Okay, yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? So from something that was obviously quite painful and led to lots of distress in your younger years, and it's gone on to become something that's helped so many hundreds, thousands of people now. It's yeah, you almost don't want to say, well, actually, if I hadn't had that pain and challenge in my early life, I wouldn't be the person I am today to do all these things. Nobody wants pain, obviously, but in this case, it is positive that you've not only worked so hard on yourself, but then you've taken that and built something very different and something that I think a lot of men appreciate. He says, talking for all men, it is something that is grounded in science, if you like. There isn't that. Sometimes I think as men, again talking for all men, we sometimes feel a bit hesitant to go and sort of go see a therapist or a somatic healer or a tantric guide or whatever. I'm not sure about that. But when you talk about, and your website's fabulous, talk about evolutionary psychology and how evolution has shaped us and formed who we are, whatever. Would you be able to talk a little bit to the evolutionary psychology side of things? So for people that don't necessarily have a full grasp of it, how does that help, or how has that helped shape the way men approach intimacy in relationships?
Yeah, I mean, there's quite a bit here in the sense of, first I'll maybe speak to a pain point that I notice a lot of men are in these days, which is, what are we supposed to be? How are we supposed to show up in the world, right? What does it mean to be a healthy man? And, a lot of guys I work with were raised in a way where we were taught what not to be as men, but there hasn't been much modeling of what does a healthy, integrated man look like these days.
Yeah.
And that leaves a lot of guys in a painful place of confusion, right? Where am I allowed to be sexual? I don't know. Am I allowed to go for what I want or be in touch with my power? Should I just be nice? Should I feel guilty about being a man? There's all these conflicting messages. And, in just a very simple sense, what I mean by my organization of Evolutionary Men is we want to take the gifts of all that masculinity has been, but also integrate it and only take forward the positive parts and leave behind, let's say, what isn't so useful these days. And that's a process. And, a radical simplification of that, a lot of guys can often kind of get their heads around is many men I work with, they'll literally use this phrase, I don't want to be that guy. And what they mean by that is, I don't want to be that guy that's a sexual predator, that uses people, that abuses people, that's frankly a dickhead, that causes harm in the world. And we've both been shown these men by our culture and plenty of human history that has countless examples of what happens when men who are specifically disconnected from their hearts, what they can do to people, to women, to children, to the environment, to other men. And a lot of men I work with experience that firsthand through, physical abuse in their house, bullying from other men. There's like lots of examples that cause men to like, whoa, I don't want to be like that. And then there was kind of this pendulum swing to the what we call the so-called nice guy, which is, well, I don't want to be that. So I don't want to be aggressive. I
Yeah.
don't want to be too assertive. I
Hmm.
don't want to be too forward with my sexuality. I never want to make anyone feel unsafe.
Yeah.
And those men often experience a different kind of pain, which is I'm just not getting what I want. I feel like I'm showing up for everyone else and I'm kind of dying inside. You know, I'm suffering, I'm in pain. And I have a hard time saying no or setting boundaries, or people use me. And so the evolutionary chain right now is kind of, well, what's the third way? You know, which in a lot of ways is, what does it mean? You know, it's crass in some sense, but as a man, to have connection to our balls, our power, our
Yeah.
sexuality, our desire, and our heart, our sensitivity, our ability to attune, to feel ourselves, to feel other people, and to kind of integrate those two in a sense into, you know, what I would kind of call this evolutionary man that can do both depending on what's needed. And where the evolutionary kind of psychology comes in is, you know, there's a lot of things that influence how we look for connection as men, what we think we're supposed to do as men, and those social norms that come from that. And one of the most fascinating things, pieces of research I discovered last year was this, they basically interviewed a bunch of men and women. So it's both around what marks the transition from being a girl into being a woman. Like, how do you know when a girl has become a woman? And how do you know when a boy has become a man? And both men and women answered this. So this is part of what's interesting. When it came to girls, both men and women tended to point to physical attributes. She has her cycle, she can give birth, her body has developed, she's a woman now, right? She's not a girl anymore. The same did not hold true for men. For men, you could be a so-called man in a fully mature body, but people would still call you a boy because both men and women pointed towards behavior. Behavior as what marked that transition. He's a man. He takes responsibility for himself, for his family, or, you know, whatever. Or, you know, something we're seeing more and more these days, fully grown man, but he's kind of failed to launch, right? He never left home. He can't really take care of himself. He's fully mature in his body, but he's still like a boy in the world. And so there's this way that because of certain evolutionary pressures, we're just seen and known and have been expected to do different things. And it shows up in kind of this meta sense in what we would call the man box, right? Which is the set of expectations. And, you know, it varies in different cultures throughout the world, but there's some similarities. This set of expectations that we're expected to check the boxes on in order to be a man. And if we're not a man. And intimacy and emotionality, these things are deeply related to this in terms of what's considered okay and not. But it also goes down to some extent in terms of biology. So that's another way to think about the evolutionary psychology, is sometimes our behaviors are not solely motivated by biology, but they're certainly influenced by them. And for a lot of guys, you know, where this starts to fit into the man box is just because of the way humans procreate, right? One man can technically sire many children with many different women. So if, you know, after a war or whatever, you kind of only need one man. You know, you need a lot less men. The pressure point is not on the men, let's just say. It's on the women who can carry the children. And one of the ramifications of that is this has changed quite a bit. And again, it's a generalization. But oftentimes in different cultures throughout the world, men's bodies and lives were considered more disposable. Because if we lost 100 men, we only needed 10 men to repopulate a town, let's just say, right? With the same is not true with the feminine, with women. And so that has kind of filtered up into all kinds of things in terms of, again, it's changing now, but traditionally, the military was mostly staffed by men. Men mostly died in wars.
Yeah.
The most dangerous jobs, the most toxic jobs have tended to be held by men. Men's bodies have more often than not been considered kind of disposable. And that has huge ramifications, because then what it teaches us men is that our bodies aren't important. And then so often from a young age, boys start to get this signal that it doesn't matter. You don't need to be connected to your body, right? So even at a young age, oftentimes they've done studies, and again, there's always exceptions to this. Young boys are often parented differently than young girls.
Yeah,
right?
definitely.
If a boy falls down, scrapes his knee, it's like, oh, stop crying. You're okay. You're tough. You can get through it.
Yes.
Right? What that signal really means is overrule what you're feeling in your body with your head. Right? And then we get into school, the kind of mainstream educational system, where they've done lots of studies. Boys do tend to be more kinesthetic, need more movement. They've got a lot of energy if you've ever been around a young boy, right? There's just, but what are they told in school? Sit still.
Still.
So that desire to move in your body, override that with your head, right? Disconnect from that. Then we get into adolescence, and then it starts to come from the peers. Our bodies are developing at different times. There's, social hierarchy. We start to learn this lesson. Don't show any weakness or vulnerability, because you'll be bullied. You'll be made fun of. You may literally be hurt. So hold it all inside. Whatever you're feeling, hold it all inside and override it with your head. Put on that brave front. Like, yeah, no, I'm cool, man. Right? And then we get often out into the workplace, where we're generally rewarded in our kind of hyper-capitalist culture for, oh yeah, he works like 80 hours a week, just super dedicated. Like, meanwhile, his body is often falling apart. Our relationships are sometimes falling apart. But the sense is we're often taught and rewarded as men, because of some of these biological roots that then become cultural ones, to be disconnected from our bodies. And then lo and behold, right, in the work I do, and I imagine some of what you connect to as well, emotions always start as sensations in the body. So if we're disconnected from our body, guess what? We're disconnected from our emotions. And when we're disconnected from our body and our emotions, it can be much harder to know what we're feeling inside and communicate that to someone and build that sense of intimacy that is so nourishing for the human soul. Just the feeling of, I'm seeing you, you're seeing me, and we're on the shared reality right now. That does all kinds of things for our nervous system, right? It relaxes us, our vagal nerve, it helps us restore. But because of this, men are often totally undertrained in terms of how to be in their bodies, how to identify their emotions, and how to communicate, right? When I started in this work, it's finally changed, but, a therapist or a friend or a coach would ask me, how you doing? How are you? I'm fine. Right? I'm okay. Like, literally my emotional range and vocabulary was okay, bad, or good. Like, if you asked me, because I had never been taught what the different things happening inside of me were. And lo and behold, then it was hard for me to communicate that. And when I couldn't communicate that, people rarely felt connected to me, because I was actually not super connected to myself. So kind of bringing this all together, what we're being asked to do in a lot of ways as men right now is, yes, stay in touch with our power, our agency, our capacity to protect, provide, all these kind of traditional values, but also much more modern ones in terms of, we got to know how to feel, how to talk, how to communicate, how to be present, how not to just ruminate in our heads all day thinking about the next goal or thing we have to do or problem to fix, but to actually get really, really present to ourselves. And as we do that, a lot becomes possible. So I went quite a tangent there, so I'll pause.
No. It was. I hadn't a couple of things there. One, I don't know why. I hadn't really thought of the fact that girls become women. It just happens by nature, whereas boys almost have to earn manhood. And I guess if you look at lots of societies globally, sort of societies outside of the Western culture, where boys go off to hunt at 14, 15, and have to come back with a kill, or boys have to undergo a certain ritual and things to go through that. Even in the Jewish religion, you go through a particular ritual to become a man, and that's something that So I've got a 15-year-old son and an 18-year-old daughter, and absolutely we parented them differently. They're very different individuals. My daughter's very much into drama and psychology and philosophy. That's her big passions. My son's he's very academic but super sporty and goes to the gym and all those sort of things. So, and I think intentionally we sent. So Alexander goes to an all-boys school, Madeline to an all-girls school, and I think the reason we did that was because, as you said, there's quite a lot of sort of when you hit teenage years or even earlier, boys are very. I can remember being a boy a long time ago, but very fidgety and very moving, and almost when you're benchmarking that against the girls in the class who sat there very quiet and very just getting on with things. So I thought having all the boys together and all the girls together, hopefully the teachers will manage it in a different way. And to be fair, both schools have been great. They really have. One thing that they don't teach, and I don't know any schools that teach this necessarily in the UK anyway. We have sex ed here, so sex education. It's very practical. So they learn about safe sex. They learn about sexually transmitted diseases. They have a lesson or two on consent, which is great, but they don't have lessons on how to communicate, how to, as you said in the beginning, how to talk with girls differently than you talk with boys, how to have that conversation, what intimacy looks like, and all those things. And I think the challenge with that is that obviously, if you're not getting information from one source, you're going to look for information elsewhere. And one of the big changes in society has happened since I was young. So when I was young, there was no social media, there was no smartphones, there was no laptops, no computers, basically. And pornography, as an example, was a magazine your older brother might have had in the cabinet back. And it's like, oh my God, there's a naked woman on this picture. Look at this static picture. Whereas now, the research shows average age now is 12 and 13-year-old boys access everything or can access anything. I think there are 4 billion hits a month now on Pornhub and those sort of things. And when boys, in particular, 12 and 13, that haven't really understood what a relationship's all about, when they see that as potential what a relationship is or sex is, or they hear from people like, I know, sort of an Andrew Tate type character and the sort of incel community, you can understand when their brains are still forming, they're still having all this input, why they can be so confused. And that's, as a dad of a 15-year-old, I'm asking for free therapy, but it's sort of how do you handle that when you've got a teenage kid is a good kid, good friends, all that sort of stuff, but you still don't know what he's really believing in, what he thinks a young man is allowed to be in today's society. I know that's a challenge that you've addressed head on, and that's the big one for me personally as a dad. How do I make sure he's set up to go out and do well in the world and to be a good partner, a good dad, a good friend, those sort of things. That's what you want for your son, really, is to be a decent man. But what on earth does that mean?
Yeah. Well, this is, I think, one of the great challenges of our time right now, because, like you said, in a lot of different cultures around the world, there were what we call rites of passage.
Yeah.
Right? Where were these actual initiatory frameworks that young boys were taken through. And, long and short of it, it's different in different cultures. But really what happens is young boys start to spend time with older, mature men.
Yeah.
And so they start to receive the transmission, of what healthy masculinity, for better or worse, is in that culture at the
Mhm.
time, which different cultures obviously have different manifestations of that. But the practice itself is really useful because, right, Robert Bly, who wrote Iron John and was a big author in the 90s, kind of kickstarted a lot of men's work. Another one of the things he pointed to, right, is the shift from pre-industrial to industrial cultures. There was a big change because, yeah, around that age, boys would go off and be with the men, the uncles, their fathers, on the job, learning a trade, spending the day kind of seeing their father be in the world or seeing
Yeah.
other trusted elder males in the world. And when industrialization happened, there was a split. Suddenly, dad's going off to work all day in the factory. I'm staying home with mom, or eventually I get put in school, which more and more has been female teachers. So young boys have spent more and more
Mm.
time around women, not men. And that has a ramification because then, again, we don't have necessarily the modeling that we need for, okay, what does it mean? And so these rites of passage are something that are starting to kind of come back online. But one very simple thing when you ask that question is help expose him to other good men where he gets to sit and talk and learn and ask questions. Absolutely with you, but also with peers and other men you trust in your community, because that's a really important thing. And again, I can't remember the exact reference, but there's an incredible piece of research that shows boys in particular, like sometimes just a single intervention from an older, mature man who gives them some guidance and lets them know, hey, you're okay. Like just sometimes even a single intervention can completely change the trajectory of their lives.
Yeah.
And so that kind of mentorship, that
Mhm.
being around older men, whether it's through an explicit rite of passage or just involving him in community and bringing him to things, can be really important. Then along with just a lot of curiosity around what do you believe, right? Asking him, what do you believe? What are your friends believing? What are you guys seeing? Because I think the struggle with a lot of young boys right now is there is a vacuum. And in that vacuum, the loudest voices like Andrew Tate are the ones that boys are gravitating to, because there
Mm.
aren't a lot of other voices that are saying, actually, there's more to it than that, right? There's more complexity to that, and there's a lot more available to you than that. The other thing that I imagine, just the nature of your podcast and the work you're in is you're already modeling something to him, right? As a man who's interested in interiors and intimacy and
Mhm.
connection, and I imagine growth, and is continuing to do your work. That is one of the greatest gifts I think a father can give a son or any of their children, is to show them that, hey, life is a process of growth. None of us come out perfect. We're always learning and growing and trying to become more whole and human. And see, look at me. I'm still doing that, right? I don't have it all figured out as your dad, but here's what I know has worked for me. Here's what hasn't worked for me. What's working for you? What isn't working for you, right? There's that curiosity. Along with, also just starting to, when possible, again, I imagine you do this, but rewrite the story that it's okay to feel, right? It's okay to grieve. It's okay to be sad. It's okay to be anxious and scared. None of those things are the problem. And the guys who say that that stuff is a problem, the real honest truth is they're afraid, right? They're afraid. They're afraid to feel grief. They're afraid to feel uncertainty. They're afraid to feel self-doubt or their inner critic or whatever that might be. So they have to construct all this posturing and armor about how real men don't feel, right?
Yeah.
We never show weakness. We're always tough, but it's just made up. It's not true, right? Another stat I saw last year was men who self-identify heavily with traditional masculine and stoic ideas of kind of, head over body and all that kind of stuff, like twice as likely to commit suicide. Twice as likely. It has massive ramifications,
Mm.
this don't feel thing. And the other thing I would say along with that is teaching our kids that feeling is okay and how to identify those feelings and then what to do with them. I think this is another thing where a lot of men and boys get lost is no one shows us what to do with them. No one shows us how to identify them and become, fluent, let's just say, in the language of emotionality, let alone what to do with them. And when we can't identify it and we don't know what to do with it, guess what we do as men when there's this unease in our body? We try to get rid of that feeling by turning to something outside of us. Porn, alcohol, weed, overworking, sex addiction, you name it, because no one has really shown us any other tools to frankly medicate ourselves. And so a lot of guys get lost in that. And what I've seen is we increase our emotional fluency of understanding what's happening inside of ourselves and then have some tools with which, what do we do with that? Lo and behold, a lot of that stuff goes down. Our need for it, our compulsions for it, because we have ways to work with the discomfort in our body.
I really resonated with what you said about the boys working with their dads and meeting other people or whatever. So my family, so my dad, granddads, great granddads, they're all from coal mining country and sort of north of England. And my granddad, so my dad's dad was a coal miner. My mum's dad was a coal miner. My dad went down the coal mines when he was sort of 16. His brother did. And so my dad's boss was his to-be father-in-law, and he watched his dad work all the time. And in that generation, when the sort of boys are sort of 16, they would go to the pub or the bar, and the dad would buy them half a pint or a drink. They just sat in the corner quietly and just watched, really. And they were sort of, even though it wasn't legal to drink at that age, but he was just having half a pint for the night, watching the other men, whether they be talking about horses or playing snooker or playing darts or whatever. They just got used to being around other men. And then, so it's not necessarily saying they were very emotional with one another. I think, coal miners aren't traditionally very emotional people, but it's interesting how they had that big family unit. The whole village was a coal mining village. Everybody knew when somebody didn't come back from the mine, when somebody was injured, they were all out there helping. It was a proper community. The community raised the family, really, if you like. I certainly find that now, whether it's doing this or just knowing my son, I certainly have much more open conversations with him than my dad would with me, because I think if I might feel this is going to cause both of us some embarrassment for a minute to ask him about emotions, sex, intimacy, whatever, it passes so quickly, and I would much rather he had the information from people like you via me that I can sort of pass on to him rather than him hunting around, because there's always information there to fill the void. It's just being able to filter the information, which is hard. So we do intentionally sort of listen to podcasts together or watch something on TV, and it'll prompt a conversation or whatever. And I think it's part of our job, really. I see it as part of my job as being a dad. My job isn't to be his best friend. He's got friends for that. My job is to sort of hopefully guide him and find resource and information that will answer the questions that he has, in the hope that he'll then go on to become he'll make mistakes. I still make mistakes, for goodness sake. But if you can sort of arm them as much as possible to recognize what vulnerability is all about. But on the emotions piece then, so as you said, we have been taught, or we've recognized through media, that if we get shot in the shoulder, we just brush it off. If we get shot in the leg, we keep running, and all of a sudden we just carry on with it, and we rescue a damsel in distress at the same time. Mm-hmm. And so those emotions are not something we wear. As a man, as a dad, and as etc. So I guess the fear is that, gosh, if I recognize all these emotions and I'm aware of all these emotions, gosh, what do I do with them now? Now I've sort of got them all. I've got this, I've got fear emotion, I've got happiness emotion, I've got sadness, I've got grief, whatever. Oh my goodness, what do I? So when you take a group of men and you start to talk about them, help peel back the layers and get them to understand what emotions are, and emotions aren't bad things, they help us connect. How do you help them? It's probably not the right word, but manage their emotions or use them as opposed to being sort of stuck with them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. I think this is where a lot of men get lost. I've literally worked with dozens of men who will share like, yeah, I can feel
Mm-hmm.
there's this like tidal wave of grief. But my fear is if I let myself feel it, I'll never come back.
Yeah.
Like it's just gonna devastate me.
Mm-hmm.
And that's often because we haven't had the experience of being led through them
Yeah.
in a sense. And that's where, again, masculine presence can be a particular gift, whether it's another man, a brother, a friend. The long and short of it is it's a bit of a paradox that men are often surprised to learn that the more we tend to try to avoid an emotion inside of ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
the more we'll actually end up creating more of it. This is like one of the wild things that in trying to avoid hurting someone, we'll often hurt them.
Yeah.
Or in trying to avoid feeling grief, we'll actually start to feel even more devastation in our lives. So the work I really guide men through is just kind of conceptually is we learn to turn toward our pain, to actually go into it head on and build the capacity to just stay present with it.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing a lot of men don't know or haven't experienced, because again, they maybe didn't have a father lucky enough to stay present with them and help them get in touch with their feeling, is that the quickest way to dissolve an emotion is to touch it completely. It's like when we fully go into it. And I've done some unbelievably intense work with guys with various different types of trauma and shames and things they've had in their nervous system literally for decades sometimes. And the wild thing is, when we really fully go into it, it often doesn't last more than 10 minutes or so. Like, it doesn't mean there won't be another set that comes
Yeah.
through
Yeah.
in life,
Yeah.
kind of like ocean waves, but the actual visceralness, it doesn't last when we give ourselves over to it. And where groups of men become particularly incredible is when we're in community and connection, we're allowed to feel more, right? So suddenly we have our bearings as this grief comes over us. What a lot of guys get wrong is I say, some feelings aren't meant to be felt alone. We are relational creatures. And so some guys will come to me and say, I wish I could cry, but I can't cry. I cannot access it. I get them in a room, 8 other men around them, suddenly just one hand on the shoulder, and they dissolve. A lifetime's worth of grief comes out because suddenly they're being held in something. So it's both learning to identify and then how to work with them safely and consciously. That's the other thing. And again, what I've seen is just like that kind of masculine mentorship thing is one of the quickest ways to start to get a sense of, what do I do with my grief? How do I express my anger in a healthy way, or my fear, whatever? Or frankly, for a lot of guys, my just exhaustion and overwhelm is when they see another man do it. And another man just fully lets himself go, grieving a loss in his life or something. But he's still there, right? He's not totally collapsed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not being a dick. He's not dissociating from it. And they're like, whoa, I trust you more now. I feel you more now. I experience you as more powerful. There's more of you here than there was 10 minutes ago. Or for a lot of guys too, who are kind of more in the nicer guy territory, when they get to experience and see a man fully embody and move his anger, but not 1 second of that feels unsafe, right? You were fully owning your anger, and I felt totally safe to be around you. Nobody even showed me or told me that was possible, right? These different ways to stay present with it. And so when we see other men modeling it, it's like, our nervous system, it's like, oh, that's what it is to stand in presence and grieve or fear or be angry or whatever that might be. And there's countless tools, like specific tools for how we work with that. But the most basic one is we learn to create contained and safe spaces where we can explore our emotional content. And that's why I particularly focus on men's groups, right? Where we have a place where the actual context is we can go into these things and there's agreements around them. I mean, a simple example I sometimes give, maybe a less pleasant version of this is, we all probably know some people in life who are just kind of complainers. They just complain. And it's usually pretty draining to kind of be around that energy. But sometimes just simply setting a container, a context around it, where it's like, hey, you know what? It seems like you've got a lot on your mind. Here's what I love to do. I'm going to put on a timer, 4 minutes, and I want you to just whine and complain about everything that's awful in your life right now. The thing is, most of us are totally happy to do it for 4 minutes when we know there's a container around it and the person can really just vent and let it go. And then almost always after the timer, there's like a, and now we can connect as human beings and this stuff's not there. It's when it's unconscious that it's often destructive. And for us men, that might be our anger. We're not wanting to deal with it. And then sometimes we just explode in totally inappropriate rage, right? Someone cuts us off in traffic or in line somewhere. And the offense, let's just say, is not at all correlated to the bigness of the response. That's because it's not that you're angry about. It's all the other stuff in your life you haven't been able to bring that forward. So we create a conscious container for that of, I'm going to go be with my men and I'm actually going to allow my body to feel the anger that I need to feel, to tell off my boss, to rage about my job loss or my relationship or whatever that might be. So in a sense, we create conscious spaces where we're intentionally going in to move the energy. And that's almost all it ever is it's energy in our body that just needs to move somewhere. And this is what a lot of guys kind of get wrong then, is that because we don't know how to handle that, and we're taught, we disconnect from our bodies and our emotions. And guess where the only place to go is then? Up into our heads, where we overthink things and ruminate things and have these inner critics and voices that are just so painful for so many guys. And we get so stuck up here and we actually lose a lot of our capacity. So, some guys, when I start talking about emotions, they, oh my God, that's like woo-woo, everybody's just crying kind of stuff. Like there's a lot of that in the culture still. But what I come back with is, there's an incredible amount of research now that shows, we have this bundle of nerve that goes down our body called the vagal nerve, right? Which is a collection that of different nerves that link up our nervous system and is essentially the highway between our brain and our body, just what connects it. But what they found with research is, and this is totally wild, is only 20% of that highway, 20% of that bandwidth is brain to body. 80% of that channel is body to brain. That's the direction the information is flowing.
Wow, I would never have thought that.
If we are not in our bodies as men, in any given moment, we're missing out on 80% of the available information that's alive in that moment, that lo and behold is the exact information we need to make wise decisions and be effective leaders. So if we're not in our bodies and our emotions by extension, we're actually missing out on quite a bit. We're not as effective in the world. And most people have, this intuition about gut instinct. Sometimes it's like, I followed my gut and turns out it was right. That's all that information flowing up through our body that so many of us men are taught to ignore. And when we come back into contact with it, lo and behold, we just become more effective in the world and we're able to make better decisions. This is the other thing a lot of men get wrong about emotions is we like to think decisions are made by our rational mind, and they're not. Emotions drive decisions. And this is something a lot of men don't want to face. And there's this wild, there's always these extreme case studies, right? Where someone gets like a rod through part of their brain or something. So part of the brain's off and the rest is
Yeah.
there. And there's an example of someone who, basically the emotional part of the brain got damaged. Everything else was fine, but the part that feels and processes emotions. And lo and behold, that man could not make very simple decisions anymore of what shirt am I going to wear? What should I eat right now? Because those decisions, way more than most men want to realize, they're actually emotional decisions, right? And so when we're cut off from our emotions, we're also less able to make decisions, be decisive in our life, and take action. And, it's right there in the word emotion. This is kind of a platitude that, a lot of people have heard. It's energy in motion. Emotion is our body's biochemical reactions to the environment in our relationships that are supposed to drive action in our lives. When we're not in touch with those emotions, we don't often take action. And that's why I think more and more men are suffering from just deep depression these days. And what I found is we get men in circles, get men into their emotions, in their bodies, when they finally feel how angry they are, how sad they are, how exhausted by their job they are. When they really let the emotional experience come up and contact it, what tends to happen? Pretty fast, they make some actual changes in their life. I got to set boundaries at work, or I'm leaving that relationship. There's an actual movement that goes along with the emotion. But when we're stuffing them all the time, we don't take as much movement. And that's where so many men just feel kind of stuck, lost, not empowered in their lives. And it all comes back to this emotion thing. So what I tell guys is, you're going to be more powerful, more effective, more connected in your relationships the more you build fluency with what's going inside. And more than anything else, regardless of all that, you are going to feel more empowered to handle yourself and your experiences, right? You're going to have a sense of, oh, I can work with my grief. I don't have to be afraid of it, or it's not going to overwhelm me. Like, I have some agency and control over my state, over my mood, by learning to work with this stuff with other men, with coaches, with therapists. There's lots of different avenues.
It's very, very, very interesting and relevant to me right now. So just a personal moment for a second, if that's okay. So my dad died about 5 weeks ago, and my mum died about 18 months ago. And
Wow.
I think with my mum, she died of dementia, so he almost died twice in a way. And my dad didn't. He sort of went into hospital, was fine, had an operation, and didn't come out of it. But I think when my mum died, I held off on grieving to make sure my dad and everybody else was okay. And my dad died, and I held off on the emotion to make sure my sister was okay, my kids were okay, his grandkids and everything else. And so I'm exactly in that place that the emotion's all in there, and it's that sort of, exactly as you said, it's that sort of fear of, oh my gosh, but if I let it sort of creep up, then is it going to overwhelm? Is it going to stop me? And I didn't cry at either funerals, or held other people while they cried and tried. And I think I'm a relatively switched on human being, touched by emotions and things, and generally I am. But just with that, it was almost something that sort of took me back to no, you've got to be the sort of stoic upper lip here and sort of look after everybody else, really. So what you said you could literally be talking just to me. With that, so thank you for that, and I do plan to do what you said and sort of talk to somebody, and I think have that discussion. And I've been to therapy and things like that before, and I've always found it much easier to release those emotions with a stranger or somebody I don't know, or somebody that has no skin in the game, so to speak.
Totally.
And it's not a fear of being seen as being weak by my family or whatever, but I know they're grieving, and I don't want to sort of add my grief to their grief. If that makes sense. So I think what you said was So it's for everybody else, but it felt like it was just for me. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I'm sorry for your loss. And
Thank you.
What you point to there is, I think, one of the big challenges and traps a lot of men fall into is there's a noble intent of I don't want to burden
Yeah.
others with my feelings or my grief or my pain. And so we hold it inside, right? We kind of become that tough guy, which then, it will catch up to us in terms of health challenges, autoimmune disorders, will push people away. There's all kinds of ways. So it's great that you're conscious about working that. And again, one of the things I really heavily push male community and men's groups is because it's an incredible place to rewrite that story. And what I mean by that is oftentimes guys don't believe it when I'm like, no, yeah, your emotional content's not a burden. Like, it's okay. I can handle myself. If it's too much, I'll let you know. And they're like, okay, yeah, I don't think so. I'm going to hold it in. But then what'll happen is they'll have an experience where another man will bring forward his pain. And afterwards, they'll be like, thank you so much for sharing that with me. I feel so much more connected to you. You're so brave that that was useful for me to connect to my pain. And I feel like you just unlocked something for me. And they'll have this experience of, oh, wait, so was it a burden when that man shared that with you? And they're like, oh my God, no, not at all. I'm so grateful he was vulnerable like that.
Yeah.
And then that's the moment where I have to point out, well, that's what happens when you do it for other men. And so every time as men, we take that risk. And, I'll be honest, not everybody is going to meet us in this. Not everybody has the capacity to hold us emotionally or be radically present. We have to be discerning with who we do this with. But in the right connection, the right relationships, the right community, what we learn is, as men, is actually one of the ways we can serve each other is by bringing forth our pain. Because what it does is it immediately creates a space of safety for other men who are holding it and thinking, oh, I'm weird, or I don't want to burden. Oh, if he can do that, that was brave. So wait, I'm going to do that too. Hey, this thing happened to me and it's been bugging me and it's been overwhelming me for years. And then I bring it forward. And then another man sees those two and he's like, oh my God, when you shared that thing about your dad, that reminded me of when I was a kid. I had totally forgotten about that time he totally yelled at me or shut me down. And suddenly that man's in tears. And it creates this wave that literally makes a space for other men to come forward, where we realize oftentimes the thing we think will burden others the most and that keeps us separate, it's the very thing that if we bring it forward into the right connections and communities, creates the most connection, creates the most belonging, and quite literally unburdens us as men, where we leave and we're like, oh, there's more room in my chest. I feel a little lighter. My face is relaxed. Wow, I was carrying a lot there that I kind of just normalized over time. And now that it's gone, I'm like, whoa, I have a lot more space here. What do I want to put back inside? So I think I'm just glad you brought that out, because it's something I've really seen in a lot of men that, again, it has a noble intent, but this belief that me sharing myself will burden those around me, in that oftentimes it's exactly the opposite.
And I guess that's why people that go to groups like AA or NA, whatever, are more successful than by themselves, because you go there and I stopped drinking about 14 years ago, and which is great, and I feel great now and everything. But I think when you go to the groups and you find that other people are saying things, you think, oh gosh, well, I can say this now, and exactly that, you do leave there being lighter, and you sort of, well, okay, because I'm not burdening anybody else, because we're all backwards and forwards. It's just a dialogue, really. Nobody's walking away with my burden. They've heard it, it's gone, I've released it, and that's so I think that's and I think that comes down to the next point I wanted to touch on, was around communication, because I think in the last generation, for lots of great reasons, I think we've got a much more diverse workforce. We have many more women go out to work, many more. Both households have a man working, a woman working out there. My mum stayed at home, my grandma stayed at home, and it was those generations did. And whatever anybody's choice is absolutely fine. But I do think that sometimes when people are earning sort of similar salaries, somebody's working late and somebody's going earlier, somebody's on a business trip, whatever, I do think we find it harder to communicate with our partners. I think when you've been with somebody, whether it's 2 years, 5 years, 20 years, things have probably changed during those 2 years, 5 years, 20 years. Things that you liked once upon a time, you don't like anymore. That you think, oh, do I have to go on a vacation with his in-laws again this year to the cabin? No, I've hated it for the last 10 years. And I think part of it as a man or a woman indeed is that you perhaps have been thinking about something for a few weeks, a few months, maybe even longer, and I have this terrible temptation to just blurt it out. If I go on holiday with your family one more time, I'm going to go insane. What? I've been thinking about it for a year since the last trip, and it's almost how do we create that sort of safe space where I can say something, the person's then going to have time to absorb it and think about it, and then come back with a discussion. Because I'm also very guilty of somebody will say something, I feel a need to immediately respond. My daughter's doing her really important exams right now, and she might come in and say, I'm going to a party at Samira's house tomorrow. So, no, you're not. You got exams. No, not even thinking that she doesn't have an exam for a week. It's good to have some downtime. And when I think about it for 5 minutes, it's completely rational. But yeah, so creating that safe space, in particular between husband and wife or several partners, how do you create that space where you can feel safe to raise those topics that you perhaps feel challenging?
Yeah, it's such a great question. I think it's one of the big changes I'm seeing in modern relationships. In some sense, one of the most effective hacks I've seen is when, as men, we take on the responsibility for becoming the emotional leaders of the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning we initiate, create the space for the conversations to process any tensions, quite simply. Like, hey, I noticed, I kind of feels like you're mad at me. Are you mad at me? Is there something going on? Did I say something? Like, instead of just thinking about that and assuming, oh, she's mad at me. Well, I'm kind of mad at her now because she didn't do this thing. Suddenly the resentments are just building up and you're like in the same room and you're like, this feels awful.
Yeah.
But we actually face that head on. And we create a container to have that conversation of like, hey, is there anything, we need to clear the air with? Or, and it's really a two-part thing. The first part is we have to gain some capacity for how to regulate our nervous system and notice our reactivity, right? Oh, am I in a reactive place right now? And what's driving that? Often some fear, some resentment, some anger, something unexpressed, or a misunderstanding. And so we learn some tools and capacities for identifying what's happening in ourselves, slowing ourselves down, breathing, and then initiating and creating safe spaces for our partner, right? Where we're, there's so many different ways to do this, but one of the simplest ones is modeling and guiding towards I-based statements rather than you-based statements. Right? Which is where we get into all kinds of trouble with our partner. You always, or you're, why are you so pissed at me? Right? Which I'm making up a whole story. My partner's pissed at me. Versus like, hey, I'm having this feeling that you're mad at me. Is that true? Right? And I'm not there. I'm just creating a space to get to know my partner more. And they might be like, oh yeah, no, I'm totally pissed at you. Or they might be like, oh no, I'm just really stressed about this thing at work. It has nothing to do with you. But if we don't take the time and use that language, we can create a fight, right? Because she's like, why are you assuming you know my experience? And then, he's just throwing daggers at each other. And again, I know I keep coming back to this, but I tend to guide men towards the great place to practice and build these skills is in the safety and low stakes of relationships with other men, where we get to start to explore, what am I feeling? What am I reactive around? I notice there's this thing going on in my relationship. I don't know how to talk about it. And then we literally workshop it. Because I do this in men's groups all the time. So, okay, imagine your wife standing right in front of you. What are you going to say to her? Okay, well, you can imagine if she heard that, her defenses might immediately go up. But with just often a little context setting of like, hey, I'm actually really nervous to bring this up to you. But this thing happened last week. You told me you were going to do X. You didn't do it. And like, I'm feeling pretty mad about it. Right. And she's like, oh, okay. It has such a different energy. So there's a certain amount of skill building around how to be aware of what's happening inside ourselves and create a safe space for someone else to share what's happening inside of them. that really makes a difference and involves us creating some actual capacity in our nervous system. And this, I think, ties back to what you were saying about it. This stuff just isn't taught in schools, right? We're fed this garbage media of then they met and they lived happily ever after, when it's actually like, oh no, when most movies cut, that's when the real relationship begins.
Yeah.
When you're pissed at each other, when you've been on vacation with each other for 3 weeks, when your partner's telling the same story they've told 1,000 times and you're getting annoyed by it. Those are the real things. And the real skill, I would say, in a lot of ways that makes us effective leaders as men is how can we stay present in tension and conflict without collapsing, disappearing, or getting aggressive and posturing, right? And this is such a big deal for us men, that we literally have to be taught, and it really helps to see it modeled, and it helps us to get feedback from other people as well, which again is why I'm a big fan of groups, because we can play with this stuff and be like, wow, you realize you said that? Like, you're extremely pissed off? And they're like, no, I'm not. And they're like, yeah, actually, I can feel the agitation. Like, what do you think that's going to feel like for your partner to get that? Versus you coming towards and saying, hey, like, I'm really angry, right? I'm really angry at what happened last week when you said X, Y, Z. It immediately feels really different.
Yes.
And we can own our experience and our emotional process and content. But to be able to do that, lo and behold, we got to be in our bodies, connected to them, know what our feelings are. And that's where a lot of men just are not educated.
I've taken a lot of time, so sorry. I've just got 2 more quick questions, if that's okay.
Yeah.
One was about the Heart of Shadow men's group and live retreat that you run. I know there's one coming up in September this year. I was just first of all, why is it not in London? and secondly, when you meet the men at the beginning and you sort of talk with them, and then they graduate or finish, they go through the live retreat and they come out at the end, what are the biggest changes that you see? What is it that people say to you? I know there's refs on your website, and I would put everybody to the website. The podcast, the Heart of the Shadow podcast, is fabulous. I love listening to it. What is it that you find that men leave that with?
Yeah, they leave often feeling a lot more empowered to just, as I say, it's like everything becomes workable. Any emotional tension or problem or bit of shame, suddenly in the exact thing we create in Heart of Shadow, it's like we have this kind of engine to metabolize it, whether it's a fight with our partner, insecurity, you name it. Because really what guys have the experience of is all of the energy and resource, literally metabolic energy, we put into not feeling something is energy that is not available for us to deploy towards the things we really want in life. And what's the major issue most men have 35, 40 years old and beyond? Energy management. I'm just so tired. I have too much to do. I feel so burdened and fatigued. And a lot of that ends up, it's unprocessed emotional content, right? And there's research and examples you can feel in your body of, again, going back to a young boy example. If you imagine there's a young boy crying and I come up to him and I'm like, stop crying. What does he do? How does he do it?
Yeah.
Holds his breath. His whole body tightens up. It literally stops the feeling by contracting his body. And they can trace this down to individual cells now. Like our body actually tightens up and closes these certain latches and holds it. And sometimes that's totally appropriate, right? Sometimes it's appropriate. Oftentimes after someone passes away, there's just so many overwhelming logistics and organization. You don't have time. So we have to latch this down. And then it's usually once it's all done, once all the estates are handled, then often the huge wave of grief will come because it's like, okay, now there's space. But that mechanism takes so much from men, where we don't have the energy, the vitality, we don't feel alive because so much of our life force is going to holding and resisting these feelings. So what I particularly see in something like the Heart of Shadow is men come alive. Their bodies relax, their faces brighten, their eyes brighten, There's more joy, there's more feeling. Because this is the other thing a lot of guys don't realize is my first men's coach, I remember talking to me about this. He's like, you can imagine feelings again, or it's just one pipe. And so if there's grief in there and you don't want to feel it and you clinch down on the pipe, guess what else it doesn't get through?
Yeah.
Joy.
Yeah.
Peace, freedom, vitality, love. And so we start to live in these very narrow bandwidths. And in fact, that's how most modern SSRIs, antidepressant meds, work. They take the range of experience and they narrow it. So your lows aren't nearly as low, but what you'll often find with people who've been on it, they'll report, and I don't know, I just kind of feel in the middle. Like my highs aren't high, my lows aren't lows.
Yeah.
And that can be a life-saving thing. So I'm not here to demonize that. But the point is you're often getting cut off from that top range. So in the Heart of Shadow, what we learn is we just learn to turn towards whatever the feeling is in community with tools and techniques for how to healthily and safely metabolize that and start to let go of this emotional burden we've been holding in our nervous system, oftentimes for some men for decades. And suddenly that energy comes back to us and we can show up more present with our lovers, with our friends, with our kids. And we're not afraid of conflict, of emotion, because suddenly we know we can navigate it, right? And in fact, oftentimes our greatest gifts in life come from going right towards that stuff we want to avoid the most. So it's a powerful tool that really gives guys this deep experiential sense of all those dark shadows in my nervous system, in my past, in my feeling state. I can let them out and I know how to work with them. And I actually become a more present, powerful, and frankly, alive and vital man who's enjoying my life. And then I get to do that in community and brotherhood. And we'll be having one in Portugal next year, so I'll
Portugal's
keep you in the
beautiful.
loop.
Absolutely, yeah. No, Portugal's a sensational place. And I guess almost the best reviews you must get are from partners or people that are on it. It's like, hey, who's this guy you sent back to me? Where's he been for the last 10 years? It's yeah. And then my final question, if that's okay, would be: you have since childhood really invested a lot of time and energy in yourself. You've invested a huge amount of time in getting the proposition to where it is now, and explaining and talking and supporting so many people. Obviously, going through that, you must have had some challenging stories, been in some difficult situations. I just wondered, how do you protect your own mental and physical well-being? How do you make sure that you're able to still be the person you want to be when all this sort of challenges coming towards you?
I am probably the thing that I have the most abundance of in my life is incredible connection and community with other men. So everything that I guide other men towards, I have myself. I'm part of 3 different men's groups. I have a Rolodex of men that I can literally show up and burst into tears and snot and physically be held by or be challenged by if I'm off base on something or whatever that might be. So really my great North Star in life is the quality of male connection I have around it that has allowed me to just take on more. Because like I said, I have a place as a coach, as a leader. I have to deal with my own stuff and my marriage and my relationships of trying to run a business and my own insecurities. And I have my guys I bring that to that help me get in touch with those feelings and learn to work with them so I'm not trapped by them in the same way so many other men are. So that's really been it, is, I use the very tools that I teach men, and why I teach them is because they're what changed my life. So a lot of times I just say, hey, here's what's worked for me.
Yeah.
This might work for you, I hope. Give it a try. And oftentimes it does. And then men get it. They're like, oh, wow. I used to spend it's embarrassing, Andrew. Like sometimes I would spend on different things, sometimes days, weeks, or I kid you not, even months trying to figure something out on my own. So much stress and too embarrassed to ask for help or whatever. I can ask someone and they can answer it sometimes and help me in like 2 minutes now, right? Like just as a man, I've had to just get over that. It's like, hey, I don't know how to do this. Can you help me? And someone tells me and I'm like, I just saved myself months of strife. Or there's this emotion I've been avoiding. Turns out, oh my God, I've spent 3 months been avoiding this. And I go to my group and I finally bring it. It's over in 10 minutes. And I'm like, oh my God, I just wasted 3 months avoiding that. But now I've done it. So for me, it is men's groups that are really the thing that have allowed me to flourish in my life and why I'm so passionate about getting other men involved in them.
Fabulous. Yeah, please let me know about the one in Portugal. So it's only an hour and a half flight.
Yeah, definitely.
So I'd love to meet up in person and take part in one of those groups.
So cool.
Fabulous. Thank you so much for your time. I know you're so busy, but I really, really appreciate it. You've given me a lot to think about. I'm really looking forward to listening to this with my son. He was really interested in the website and what you do and everything. So it'll give us lots to talk about. And I hope other people listening will feel the same. So yeah, thank you so much for doing what you're doing and for spending time with me.
My pleasure. And thanks so much for creating spaces like this to help get the word out and let humans and men know there's a different way.